we'll get started now, actually. Why not? This is a good group. We've got 7:05 here. And thanks for coming to the Halton Peel Humanist community. We're going to have a couple of announcements up the front here. But certainly welcome to the Halton Peel Humanist community. We're a group that is a nonprofit corporation in the city of Mississauga. We're based generally in Streetsville. A lot of our in-person meetings happen there. But of course, through the wonders of Zoom, we come to you wherever you happen to be in the country. And I see we've got a lot of people who've been here before, and we've got some of my Humanist Association of Toronto friends. I love the fact that Janet's here. I look forward to hearing from her later because she is someone who is very interested in the exercise field, having some expertise in that area, etc. And I want to welcome Motown. Motown, I think is this your first time you've been out to one of our meetings?
I'm here through the events that George Corda coordinates.
Excellent.
I just haven't been attending too frequently.
Okay. Well, it's great to have you here. And so I take it that we have all your details. So if you're finding up the events on Meetup or on Facebook, then that's a great place to reach us, certainly. And you want to like our Halton Peel Humanist Community website on Facebook. And of course, the join to the Meetup to get all those details. But certainly, if you're someone who wants to hear about us on email, then please put your email contact details to us in the chat, to me personally in the chat, and I'll make sure you get on our mailing list. And so again, welcome to Linda, and James is here today as well. James, which James are you? I know some Jameses, but maybe not yourself. Have you been to our meeting before?
Hi, Richard. Yeah, I've been here maybe a long time ago, and you know me from the Humanist group. And I know my friend Najib is there as well. Hi there.
Hey, James.
I'm just eating dinner, excuse me.
Oh, fantastic. No problem, James. Nice to have you here. And Nasheen is here as well. So nice to see you, Nasheen. And Heba as well. So Heba, great to be here. And thank you for coming out today.
You're welcome.
Great. So let's get to our presenter this evening. As you can see, Dr. Christopher Labos is here. Labos is here with us this evening, and let me go to a couple things about him before we turn the floor over to him. So, of course, this is a presentation of the Halton Peel Humanist Community and Cafe Scientifique Mississauga as we celebrate Darwin Day and the days leading up to what it would have been Charles Darwin's 213th birthday on February 12th. Of course, if he'd only done more exercise, right, maybe he would be still with us here today. But we'll talk about that in a moment. If you watch the news, of course, you'll slowly come to believe that pretty much everything is bad for you. At some point, everything seems to have caused cancer, or possibly even prevented cancer, or both. The one thing that is almost universally acknowledged to be good for you is exercise. Exercise is good, not just for heart health, also for healthy bones, lung function, preventing dementia, cancer, arthritis. So of course, the question remains, why don't we do it more? Why aren't we all in a dedicated exercise regime? So leading us through the full story on exercise today is Dr. Christopher Labos. Christopher is a cardiologist with a degree in epidemiology. He spends most of his time doing things that he doesn't get paid for, like doing research, teaching, and podcasting. Occasionally, he finds time to practice as a cardiologist so he can pay the rent. He realizes that half of his research findings will be disproved in 5 years or less. He just doesn't know which half. He's a freelance contributor for the Montreal Gazette, the CJAD, and has also appeared on CBC Radio and CBC Television. To date, no one has recognized him on the street. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the proceedings over this evening to McGill University's one and only Dr. Christopher Labos.
Hey, thank you, everyone. Alrighties, so let me call up the presentation and I will share my screen and we will start talking about exercise. And share screen. There we go. And boom. Alrighty, can everybody see the screen? There we go. All right, exercise. Yeah, I know, but it actually works. Now, as you heard sort of in the introduction, you could be forgiven if you thought that this was how the media develops the medical news, right? You spin 3 wheels and you find out that coffee can cause depression in twins. And then the next day you spin it again and you come up with a completely different story. And we think that way because, well, to a certain extent it is. You have heard that, every food has both caused and prevented cancer at some point. But there is, in fact, one thing for which there is enough evidence, and that is exercise. Exercise is the one thing where we can be fairly good and fairly confident that it is good for you, right? There are no real studies that are controversial about exercise. Exercise is good for preventing heart disease. When you look at the various risk factors, having high cholesterol is bad for you. Having high blood pressure is bad for you. Smoking is definitely bad for you. But having low cardiorespiratory fitness is really, really bad for you. Probably one of the worst things that you can do for your heart health. Excuse me. Getting the frog in my throat out of the way early. There's definitely a lot of things that we can do to be healthy, right? Obviously, we want to smoke less, we want to drink less, we want to weigh less, we have to control our diet, control our blood pressure, our cholesterol. You want to have a good social network and having friends. But exercise is probably one of the most important things that you could probably do because it's beneficial not just for heart disease, but also for cancer. Physical activity significantly reduces the risk of many common cancers like colon cancer, like breast cancer. And the population attributable risk, meaning the number of cancer cases that you could theoretically remove if everybody in a population started exercising, is pretty substantial. Like if we could get everybody to go from no exercise to regular exercise, you would reduce 10 to 15% of many cancer diagnoses. And it's good not just for cancer, but it's also good for your bones. Regular physical activity increases bone density. So you're less likely to get a fracture if you exercise regularly. You're less likely to fall if you exercise regularly because you'll have better muscle tone and better sense of balance. So there is a significant benefit in terms of osteoporosis and fracture prevention if people maintain an active lifestyle. It's also good for arthritis. If you can stay regularly active, arthritis improves. It improves function. It improves your aerobic capacity. It builds your muscles so that you have better stability of your joints, and it improves flexibility with it, which allows you to move more. The other thing too is that by improving your general functional status, it also helps you maintain a healthy weight. And especially when you're talking about knee arthritis, the less weight you put on your joints, the better off you're going to be. So, and the other thing too is that when you have an inflammatory arthritis like rheumatoid arthritis, which is also tied to cardiovascular risk because it's a pro-inflammatory state, regular exercise improves not just the arthritis, but the cardiovascular risk. Exercise is good for diabetes, right? If you stay physically active, you get a lower risk of obesity, right? It's easier to maintain a healthy body weight. That decreases insulin levels, which in turn drops your risk of developing diabetes. Even that is true. Exercise is good for Alzheimer's disease. Excuse me. Exercise is good for Alzheimer's disease. It helps. There's a lot of different risk factors for Alzheimer's disease: diabetes, low education status, smoking, obesity, hypertension, depression. All of these things are sort of tied into the Alzheimer's disease risk. But physical inactivity is one of the big ones. And so it is something that we definitely have to be mindful of. Staying active is good if you want to prevent the onset of dementia. Could you treat dementia with exercise? Well, the reality is, treating it with exercise may be taking it a step too far. But the reality is that there have been multiple studies showing that people with Alzheimer's disease improve in terms of, the scores on memory tests if you get them to stay regularly active. Isolating at home and becoming sedentary is not a good thing as a general rule. So when people with dementia exercise, it not only improves their cognitive function, they have better mobility, they're better at doing the activities of daily life. And frankly, there's no adverse events to it. So there's just upside when it comes to getting people with dementia to stay regularly active. It also decreased the burden on caregivers, right? Because the more independent you are, the easier it is for the people who are caring for you. Because one of the big problems with Alzheimer's disease, it's bad for the patient, but it's usually worse for the people around them who have to care for them. Exercise is good for lung disease, because what happens when you have lung disease? You feel breathless. Because you're short of breath, then you're more worried about doing physical activity. So you tend to stay home and you avoid the activities that make you breathless. So you do less, and then your muscles become weaker and you waste away. And as your muscles become weaker, they become less efficient and you need more oxygen to accomplish the same thing. So you feel more breathless and you enter this sort of vicious spiral of getting worse and worse, because being sedentary causes you to decompensate. And so it just makes things worse and worse. So physical activity breaks that. Regular exercise means that you improve your exercise capacity, you reduce the sensation of breathlessness, you improve your quality of life. It decreases the risk of hospitalization and having to be in a hospital if you were to have an infection, because you have better lung function to begin with. And it reduces the anxiety and the depression that's associated with COPD, because you feel better. And so you have less psychological downside associated with it. And if all that wasn't enough, overall, you will live longer if you exercise regularly. So the same risk factors that are bad for cardiovascular disease are bad for overall mortality as well. And a low cardiorespiratory fitness, I've lost my mouse, I'm not entirely sure why, but low cardiorespiratory fitness, so not exercising, does significantly increase the risk of death. So the benefits to exercise in terms of cancer, heart disease and stroke, high blood pressure, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, lung disease, mental health, recovery post-surgery, diabetes, obesity, dementia, arthritis. I mean, it's good for everything, literally everything. So that's the message. Exercise is good. Thank you very much. Good night. It's been a pleasure talking with you. And so you would almost think like, well, why don't we just leave the talk here? Exercise is good. Done. Agreed. Moving on. Because the problem is, it's a very easy thing to say. It's a very, very hard thing to do. Because when you tell people exercise, yeah, but what can we really do for our health? Give us the inside scoop. I'm like, just exercise, be active. No, but seriously, tell me the tricks. Should I eat cauliflower? Is that what's going to make me live longer? And it's no, really, just go for a 30-minute walk every day. And it's no, but I heard lentils are really good for you, or maybe pomegranate. I'm I just really just, it doesn't whatever you want and exercise. But it's not something that we're very, very good at, because there are a lot of barriers to physical activity, right? I mean, sometimes just the environment doesn't cooperate. And I don't just mean when the weather is bad because it's snowy or icy or whatever, but that's some of it. If you live in a neighborhood where it's not safe to walk at night, well, you're obviously not going to be physically active during the evening hours. Maybe you live in an apartment building and, it's all industrial around you, or it's all cityscape, and there's no real place for you to get out. And it could be that normally you would go to recreation facilities, but they're shut down because, there's a virus going around or something. So there's things that make it hard for people to exercise, and we have to acknowledge that. There's also a lot of behavioral issues, right? I mean, if you had bad experiences because you went to the gym and you didn't really like it, or you joined the team and you didn't really like it, that's not going to make you interested. If you weren't really somebody who played sports as a kid, you're probably not going to take that up as an adult. And maybe your personality is such that you don't like doing group activities. You prefer to do stuff on your own. So that's going to influence how readily you join into physical activity regimens. It also depends how much you enjoy it. I run, I like to run, I enjoy it. Some people don't, right? If you have friends that want to go play tennis and you don't really like tennis, well, that's going to be an issue. And, there's also a lot of psychological stuff that goes into it, right? If you don't really want to exercise, it's very hard to get over that motivational hurdle. And there's a lot of social stuff, right? If you're part of a group that does it, or if you're part of a family that does stuff as activities, right? If you have a regular game of football with your friends, and that's great. If you have a social group that hey, let's meet up and play soccer every Saturday or Sunday, that makes it easier. So a lot of it depends on your social group too and what they're into. And, a lot of it is age and your education and your gender. Men tend to join up into sports groups, women less so, although obviously women play sports too. It also depends on your age, right? When you're young, you play. During the whole middle of your life, you're busy working and taking care of your kids. And then reach retirement age, and all of a sudden you have a lot more free time and you get back into it. So where you are in the stage of life is going to affect how much time you have for exercise. So a lot of these factors play into it. So there's not just one reason why exercise is difficult. The reality is that most people exercise to lose weight or to be healthy. And that's unfortunate because it's actually not the best way to do that. And we'll talk about weight loss too. But, we're always looking for easier solutions, right? So people want to use diet pills. Most diet pills, especially the ones that you get on the internet, are garbage. But there actually are medications that help with weight loss. I'm going to talk about them a little bit at the end, and we can talk about that more later if people are interested. But there actually are proven prescription medications that can help with weight loss and can be prescribed specifically for the treatment of obesity under specific criteria. And I have used them, and they have, moderate success. But most of the things you see advertised on the internet that are available without a prescription are frankly garbage and are not going to work. There's a lot of books that are going to give you or promise you miracle pills, usually being advertised by beautiful people, because of course, that's how you get people to buy stuff. And of course, you have various individuals who are now running for politics who will, say things that are frankly untrue and try to make you believe that there are many types of miracle foods out there. The reality is none of that's going to really make a difference. The point is, you got to be active. And the risk reduction that we see with regular exercise in terms of mortality, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and colon cancer is substantial. And there is strong evidence in favor of it. And what's amazing is that exercise is roughly on par with many of the other things that we do. For example, high blood pressure. Becoming regularly physically active will drop your blood pressure by about 5 to 10 points. And you might say to yourself, well, that's not really a lot. It actually is, clinically speaking. And it's on par with, changing your diet, cutting out salt, reducing alcohol, relaxation techniques. It actually does pretty well. Starting an exercise routine is probably one of the more effective things that you can do to lower your blood pressure, in combination with medications, obviously. But, a small drop in blood pressure, even by as little as 2 points, can really decrease your risk of heart disease and stroke. Like, it's not trivial. So getting your blood pressure down by 5 points makes a huge difference. It's also roughly on par with many medications that are out there. There are significant reductions in mortality when you lower your blood pressure with medications, and similar reductions in mortality when you lower your blood pressure with physical activity. Now, it's important to remember that these are not either or paradigms. You can do both simultaneously. And frankly, you should. If you have high blood pressure, you should take medication to treat it and change your diet and become physically active. The three things together are going to be synergistic and improve your outcomes. The problem is that we try to find ways to get out of it. And not all exercise is created equal. But we should remember, and people have talked about this, that exercise is potentially as effective as many drugs for common diseases. Which begs the question, how do you exercise? Like, what are we supposed to do in order to exercise? Well, that actually depends on your age. So if you're an adult under the age of 65, most recommendations are for aerobic exercise, meaning stuff that's going to get your heart rate up. And we usually say 30 minutes of moderate intensity exercise 5 days a week, or 20 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise for 3 days a week, or a combination of both. Now, these are not maximums. These are sort of the minimums. You can obviously do more than that. But the reality is it doesn't take a lot of exercise to reach what is generally considered to be the minimum goals. 30 minutes on most days of the week of moderate intensity exercise, that is very doable if you can carve out the time in your schedule. Now, there's other aspects of exercise. It's not just aerobic activity. There is some value in muscle strength training, right? And then, improving balance and core strength. So you're going to want to have a variety of things out there. But it takes a fairly minimal time investment to achieve these types of goals. When people ask, well, okay, well, what does moderate intensity exercise actually mean? Well, Moderate intensity exercise means that you should get your heart rate and your respiratory rate up a little bit. You should feel warm. You should be sweating maybe a little bit. And the usual examples are brisk walking, stair climbing, bike riding, dancing, swimming, activities that are, effortful, but are not really going to be, you're not going to be panting short of breath. Vigorous intensity exercise, usually you got to get your heart rate and your respiratory rate really, really up there. It should be hard for you to continue a conversation with the person next to you. So if you're jogging, you can talk to the person who's jogging next to you, but it's hard. You couldn't carry on a normal conversation like you would if you were walking at a more leisurely pace. Okay, so think like playing sports. I'm going to try to find out why my mouse has disappeared. Sorry, give me a second here. Because that bothered, there we go. It's back. So this is when you have stuff like playing sports, running, aerobics, doing stuff on gym equipment where you really, really are pushing yourself. Okay. Now, people often ask like, well, what about muscle strengthening? And you're like, yeah, that should be a part of it, especially if you're an adult. You don't have to do a lot. You don't have to be, bench pressing 3 times your body weight. You basically want a high resistance weight with no more than 10 to 15 repetitions. When you get into the nitty gritty of how to do strength training, people will tell you is like, you want to do more reps with less sets or more sets with less reps. And it depends on what your goal is in terms of building muscle or just maintaining, your muscle tone. But basically, it doesn't have to be anything really, really excessive. Just, even resistance bands, push-ups, sit-ups, very low-tech stuff is going to accomplish that. The point is that you want to have some degree of muscle tone. And if you stay active, you will maintain at least the basics of that. Just going upstairs is going to strengthen a lot of your muscle tone, especially in the core. Obviously, if you want sort of, if you want washboard abs, then you have to do sort of more intense stuff. But in terms of basic health maintenance, it doesn't have to be anything particularly difficult. These recommendations, though, they do change by age. So for individuals who are over 64 or over 65, aerobic exercise is still important, but you actually want to put a little bit more effort into strength training and into dealing with stuff with balance and coordination, because as we get older, falls become an issue. Okay, so when you're young, we don't really worry about falls. That's less of a consideration. But as we get up there, so exercises specifically designed to strengthen the core and to improve balance can actually be more beneficial in this age group. The great irony is that you go to these yoga classes, which when you strip away all the cultural and spiritual elements of it, is really just core strength training. All the people who are there are young, whereas in reality, the people who would benefit most are probably the older age groups, because they're the ones who really need exercises in terms of balance and strength training. When you get to children, though, children don't need to be working out and pumping iron. They just need to play. They just need to get out there and run around and burn off some energy, which is good, not just for the parents, but good for the children as well. So when your children are 5, once they learn how to walk, just let them go out and play, like for hours. Just let them burn off steam. It's going to improve your mental sanity. Granted, they always put in this proviso of like, if your child is still crawling, you can't get too angry with them for being a lazy bum. But once they learn how to walk, just let them go out there and play. And it's important. Once they get into the school age children, 3 hours becomes a little bit excessive because they have to go to school and learn things like, who won World War II and which side we were fighting on. But 1 hour physical activity per day is important. And a lot of that is taken up by gym classes, and it's important for there to be gym classes in school. But you want to get that core of physical activity in there because we don't want our kids to be sedentary. That is one of the issues that is leading to the problem of obesity, especially in young people. The issue, of course, is one of time. People often say, well, I don't have time to exercise, but you got to make time because it's going to cost you in the long run. And there was a great video on YouTube called 23.5 hours. You can search for it. It was by Mike Evans. It's quite a few years old now, but it's still pretty good. And it basically makes the point of limit your sedentary time to 23.5 hours a day and really devote those 30 minutes to exercise. The problem is that when you actually survey people, you find out that the vast majority of them do not meet the minimum requirements for exercise. About like over half, close to 3/4 of the population does not meet the minimum requirements for exercise or for physical activity. And that's a problem, because especially even when you get to adults, even though a minority of adults met the physical activity guidelines, 70% thought they did. So we have this great unfortunate disconnect in sort of assessing how much exercise we do and whether it's enough or not. The problem is that we are not a very active society. And there's a lot about society that reinforces this idea of not being active. And we try to find ways out of it. Patients like, well, can I do this instead? Does that count as exercise? What if I'm like, the reality is like, don't try to outsmart yourself. Just go out there and do stuff. The problem is that's hard. And people who go out and buy expensive exercise equipment tend not to use it, because motivation is one thing, but there are a lot of other factors that play into our issues, or play into the issues that keep us from exercising. And part of it is we need to rethink our lives. Now, I'm not recommending you go out and buy an exercise desk like this. There are issues with them. They can be hard, especially if you have arthritis and back problems. I mean, you can certainly try them out and see if they work for you. They don't work for a lot of people. And a lot of people who do go with at least standing desks do get the ones that adjust, so you can stand and work, but then lower it when you get tired, because it is rough on the back to be and the feet to be standing for long periods of time. But the point is to try to find a way to work physical activity into your schedule. And a lot of that has to do with how we design our cities. So it's really a community or a government level, I don't want to say problem, but it needs to be a government level initiative. If you put sidewalks in cities, people will walk more. If you put in bike lanes in cities, people will bicycle. If you build parks in neighborhoods, people will play more. If you have a program called, this is something in the US, I've never actually seen it here in Canada, but the walking school bus, where instead of a bus showing up, somebody from the school comes and picks up kids and the kids walk to school. Your kids will walk more. So there are things that we can do, but they're very hard for you to do alone. If you start painting lines on the street, the police are going to come and ask you to stop. So there really has to be a community-based initiative to try to make this stuff happen, but it does work. There was a thing for a while, and I don't know if it happened in where you guys are, but there was a while there where they were building neighborhoods and not putting sidewalks. And that's a problem, because when you build sidewalks, people will walk more. If you make public transportation more accessible, people will use it rather than, drive their cars. If you make it easier to bike and have one of these bike sharing programs in your neighborhood, people will use the bike. So if you give people the tools to be active, they will use them. And if you make schools a place where kids will be physically active, given that that's where they spend the most of their day, kids will be physically active. So there should be recess as part of the school day. It's good for the kids. It's good for the teachers because they need a break. You need to make it easier for kids to walk to school. And again, that depends on your neighborhood and where you live. Obviously easier to do in more rural communities than in urban communities, although there's a bit of a trade-off, because once you get into very rural, you can't walk you could walk 5 miles. That's a bit long, right? So it's best in sort of suburban type places where there are safe routes to schools, but just having PE classes in school. Now, I'm not saying you need to grade kids on how well they play basketball, but just having them do that physical activity as part of gym class helps. And so there are benefits to that, but that requires us to structure our school curriculums in a specific way. And that requires you to be involved in the community, involved in the school board, involved in all of these things to make sure that this stuff is actually put in place and that it doesn't fall by the wayside. We can't think of exercise as something that is dangerous or something that we should be afraid of. Granted, walking up 15 floors, that's potentially a little bit difficult for most people. But we should try to remember that those who think they have not the time for bodily exercise will sooner or later have to find time for illness. And being physically active is one of the best ways to prevent illness. There is no elevator to success. You have to take the stairs. And that is the point that you need to remember, because just simple things like taking the stairs burns calories. I lost my mouse again. It's very weird. There we go. just taking the stairs makes a difference. Now, 50 calories is not a lot. Actually, it's a pretty trivial amount. But if you did it repeatedly, that would add up. Parking further away from the store and walking, in the parking lot, all that adds up, right? Walking your dog, mowing your lawn, doing all of these things will accumulate with time. So it's a question of looking at your day and seeing how can I incorporate some physical activity into the regular stuff that I do all the time. The question, of course, becomes are there risks to exercise? Like, is it dangerous? And that's what a lot of the things that really affect people or make them reluctant, given that, especially as they get older and they start to have issues like high blood pressure, like heart disease. Like, is it dangerous for me to exercise? And the answer is, well, I guess it kind of depends what exercise. There was one study, and I bring this up because I think it's an important point. It's quite a few years old now, but what they found was that the risk of death in the 30 minutes after exercise was 17 times higher than at rest, right? And this sort of feeds into a lot of people think like, oh, if I overdo it when I exercise, I'm putting myself at risk, like I'm putting strain on my heart. And that sounds like a lot, right? 17 times higher than rest in the 30 minutes after exercise, that's pretty significant. And that's actually kind of scary. But we have to think about it in terms of what the study, we have to put this into proper context. What happened was they surveyed 20,000 physicians. They were all male physicians for whatever reason, but they surveyed 20,000 male physicians. And over the course of a 12-year period, there were 122 deaths. So if you think about it, 122 deaths over 12 years amongst 20,000 physicians, well, the risk of death was pretty low. Yeah, it was maybe a little bit higher right after exercise, but overall the risk was trivial. But if you frame it in terms of an absolute risk, the risk was one sudden death per 1.5 million episodes of exertion. So is exercise putting a little bit of strain on your heart? Yes, a little bit. But the magnitude of that risk is so trivial, especially when you consider that being regularly active actually mitigates the risk of you having a severe complication during exercise. So first off, when we go back to put, 1 in 1.5 million risk of death, I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that's much more likely to kill you. I mean, tornadoes, lightning strikes, bees, fires, electrocution, crazy dogs. There's a lot of other stuff that can kill you before exercise is going to kill you. And when you break down the results, mouse has disappeared again. When you break down the results, what you found was that the people who had the highest risk were the people who didn't really exercise at all. People who exercised regularly had a much lower risk of death compared to people who were not. So if you want to lower your risk of exercise, if you want to lower your risk of exercise-induced mortality, the trick is to exercise regularly, because that's actually going to put you at lower risk. It's the people who are sedentary and suddenly engage in physical exertion that are putting themselves to a certain degree of risk, even though overall that risk is trivially small. So it's important to put these risks in context. Exercise actually decreases the risk of a cardiovascular event and premature death. And I think that's the point. Exercise is good for you. It's not dangerous per se. That being said, it's hard to forget that the first person to ever run a marathon died at the end of it. So this is the result. This is, if you know the story, this is ancient Athens after their victory against the Persians at the Battle of Marathon. The Greeks sent back a messenger to Athens to announce to the Athenians that they had won and that they should hold the city against the Persian fleet. So Philippides arrived in Athens, yelled out Nike, which was Greek for victory, and then dropped dead. According to the story. Whether it's historically accurate or not is somewhat debatable, apparently. But the point is that you should run like Philippides. You should try to finish the race like somebody else, but you should at least try to run like Philippides, because marathons, even though they are intense exercise, are probably not that risky. But it is something that worries people, because every time there's a marathon, I mean, there hasn't been marathons for a couple of years now because of COVID, but marathons have been very popular, and they are growing in popularity. I mean, I've done a couple and I enjoy it, although I haven't done one in a while. But they're becoming very popular amongst all age groups. And there's really nothing that should, in theory, prevent you from doing a marathon if you train properly for it. Obviously, you do need to train for a marathon because it's rather difficult physical exertion. But the number of deaths per year, or the rate of deaths, is not high. You're talking about somewhere between 1 and 2 deaths per 100,000 marathon runners. So deaths during marathons do happen, but they are very, very low. And so if you train properly, it is something that you could do relatively safely, as long as you take a few basic precautions. And we're going to talk about what those precautions and screening considerations should be. But the point is, a 1 in 100,000 risk of death, or 200,000 risk of death, is still pretty low if you consider that you're much more likely to die of something else, like, motor vehicle accidents or earthquakes, or, being struck by an asteroid. Actually, being struck by an asteroid is somewhat more likely, or somewhat less likely than exercise. But the point is this, is that risk, there are much more common things you should worry about, like heart disease, cancer, and stroke, which, by the way, all of which are reduced with exercise. The problem is that we humans are bad at math. And so when you tell people, the risk is 1 in 200,000 or this, they're like, I don't really know what that means. It's a very hard thing to wrap your head around. And so taking calculated risks is easy to say, but actually somewhat hard to do. So there are actual guidelines about how you should medically evaluate somebody before exercise. The point now, a lot of it is going to depend on whether you have symptoms or not. So if you have no symptoms, and if you're at low risk for cardiovascular disease, just go nuts and do whatever you want, like just exercise. If you have no symptoms and you're at low risk for cardiovascular disease, but you have certain risk factors like high blood pressure, a reasonable thing to do is to begin with low, moderate intensity exercise and go up from there. So don't try to run a marathon right away. Try running a 5K first and then see how it goes. If you're asymptomatic, meaning you have no symptoms, but you're at high risk, there is then some consideration about, being medically evaluated first, doing basic things like an electrocardiogram. I will be quite honest with you. I don't think this actually makes sense. The electrocardiogram is such a low yield diagnostic test, all things considered. And there is some debate about, is this really worthwhile or not? You're like, when a patient comes in is like, I just want to make sure I can exercise. Am I okay? I'm like, do you have any chest pain? No. I'm like, you're fine. That's usually my approach. Okay. So if you have somebody who's very, very high risk, like they have high blood pressure, diabetes, cholesterol, they're overweight, they smoke, and they've never exercised in their life, and they want to know, yeah, okay, maybe you'll do a stress test just to give them that reassurance. But it's not, in my opinion, the most useful allocation of medical resources. But there is some debate here about whether a pre-exercise screening is reasonable or not. But when people have symptoms, that's when you really have to be a little bit careful. And that's where you really want to medically evaluate them, find out why they have symptoms, try to treat the underlying problem, and then maybe get them into a supervised exercise program. And this has become admittedly inconsistently done in patients after a heart attack, right, where they put them in a cardiac rehab program. The big problem with the cardiac rehab programs, and I think this is true in Ontario as it is in Quebec, it's the funding issue. A lot of them are not funded by Medicare outside of a hospital setting, and hospital settings are so restricted that it's not many of these exist unless you're willing to pay privately, which is often a limiting factor. But that's the setting where, supervised exercise programs would be most useful. It's just that because of the way our healthcare system is structured, a lot of people don't have access to them, unfortunately, unless they have private insurance. There are actually screening tools that exist. So there's one from the American Heart Association. There's another one called the Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire. The reality is that we almost never use them clinically, because if you use them, almost everybody would test positive, and only about 2% of the population would actually have significant heart disease. That was an issue, because if you look at the questions, they'll ask you one: have you ever had a heart attack, heart surgery, cardiac catheterization, angioplasty, a pacemaker, heart valve disease, heart failure, heart transplantation, congenital heart disease? And you're like, oh, okay, that's fair. Do you have chest discomfort, dizziness in it? Do you take heart medications? Like, oh, that's kind of a lot of people. It's like, do you have other health issues? Do you have musculoskeletal problems, concerns about the safety of exercise? And do you take prescription medication? Well, that's pretty much everybody. And then they're like, are you a man older than 45? Who isn't? Are you a woman older than 55? Sure. Do you smoke? Do you have high blood pressure? Do you have cholesterol? Do you have a close relative who had heart disease? Are you diabetic? Are you physically inactive? And are you 20 pounds overweight? Well, that's basically the entire population. When you look at the issues that they raise on these questionnaires, in an effort to be as broad and as inclusive as possible, they basically made it impossible for the questionnaire to identify you as somebody who's safe to exercise. So we have to have a little bit of a more nuanced approach and really identify, okay, who are the people that we really want to target to make sure that they don't do anything dangerous? And the absolute contraindications to exercise are 9. And they are, I hope you will agree with me, a little bit ludicrous, because like, don't exercise if you've had a heart attack in the past 2 days. And it's like, is that a real consideration? Like, hey, Jim, you want to go play some tennis? I'm like, I don't know, Bill, you just had a heart attack 2 days ago. You may want to give it a week. The reality is, though, is that when patients come in with heart attacks and they get angioplasty, right? Because you usually stay in hospital for like 3-4 days just for monitoring. We tell them like, when can I get back? I'm like, honestly, the minute you get home, if you're feeling well, you can start your routine and build it up again, because it's not very dangerous, but you do want to give it a little bit of time. If you have unstable angina to the point where you're getting chest pain at rest, maybe, exercise isn't your best friend. You really need to get that looked at. You might need to unblock an artery. If you have uncontrolled arrhythmias causing symptoms, don't exercise. If you have severe valve disease, don't exercise. If you have uncontrolled heart failure, don't exercise. If you have a blood clot in your lungs, don't exercise. If you have acute myocarditis, which is a word nobody knew until COVID, now everyone does. If you have acute myocarditis, don't exercise. If you have an aneurysm in your heart, don't exercise. And if you have an acute infection, don't exercise. To be fair, most of these things, you would be so sick, you wouldn't even think of exercising. But the point is that there's really not many things that would keep you from exercising where it would be frankly dangerous to do so. And most of these conditions, you would know if you had them. So the point is you should exercise because, and you've probably heard this before, you've heard sitting is the new smoking. Now, is that actually true? Well, in one sense, yes. Sitting for more than 8 hours a day, as many of us do, because most of us have sedentary jobs because we're no longer working on farms, chopping down trees to clear land for agriculture. We live urban lives and have largely non-physical activity, and we spend too much time sitting. That is true. And so in one sense, sedentary lifestyle is very, very bad, very, very bad for you. Is it as bad as smoking? I mean, debatable. Sure, it's a slogan. The point of slogans is to crystallize a thought in people's mind. And I guess in that respect, it has solidified the idea that we shouldn't take our sedentary lifestyle. We shouldn't minimize the impact that our sedentary lifestyle is having on our health, because it's having a fairly negative impact on our health. And the more we sit, the worse off we are. So we need to be more active, as I explained to you then. Which begs the question, what's the difference between physical activity and exercise? Because I've been using the terms interchangeably because a lot of us do, but they are not really the same thing. Physical activity is basically any body movement that results in energy expenditure. And that can include a broad range of activities. It can be walking and climbing stairs. It can be, pushing your kids around in a stroller. It could be your household chores. It could be gardening. It could be, the daily activities of daily life. And that's a bit different than exercise, which is a purposeful and planned action that is designed to improve physical fitness. So running, walking, cycling, aerobics, yoga, tai chi, resistance exercises, whatever. And the reality is you should do both. And again, like me, you probably fall into the trap of using the terms interchangeably, but it's probably better to think of them as two separate things. And we shouldn't do one at the to the neglect of the other. Because physical fitness is important. And the concept of physical fitness is influenced by both physical activity and by exercise, because we need good cardiorespiratory endurance, but we also need good muscle strength. We need balance and coordination. We need flexibility. And that's why it's not just about pumping iron at the gym. It's not just about running a marathon. You want to try to have some sort of balance there, especially as you get older, where balance and flexibility are more important in terms of preventing injury. When you're young, you could fall down and bounce back up again and you're fine. The older you get, the more these things can start to have an impact. So some degree of care to make sure that you have a well-rounded exercise program is justifiable. The idea of non-exercise activities, meaning physical activity that is not strictly speaking exercise, is important because the more non-exercise activity you do, is like even if you do no regular exercise, right? So the little white squares. If you do no regular exercise, if you're still active, you do reduce the risk of you getting sick. So you should try to do both. But even if you don't spend 30 minutes jogging every day, so you don't have no purposeful exercise, but you still stay active by walking and working in your garden, the more of that you do, the better off you're going to do as well. So it's better to do something rather than nothing. This sort of leads into an interesting question, is like, can you be fat and fit? And you've heard this no doubt many times before, because you can be thin and fit, which is obviously the ideal. And you can be fat and unfit, which is obviously bad. But can you be thin and unfit? Can you be, a relatively slim person, but not exercise a lot and be kind of out of shape? Or can you have, a few extra pounds but still be in relatively good shape? Like, is this okay? And the reality is, it depends. The question becomes, who of these four has the greatest risk of premature death? Well, it's obviously this individual here, but the point is this: when you compare fit and unfit people, it's always better to be fit, even if you do have a high waist circumference, okay? So even if you are carrying extra pounds along the waist, which is not great, and we'll talk about that in a second, if you can go from an unfit state to a fit state, you will drastically reduce your risk of all-cause mortality. So we often think of exercise in terms of weight loss, but that may not be the best way to think about it. Think of exercise in terms of a way to improve your fitness, and that's what's going to make you healthier. Now, we shouldn't neglect the issue of obesity. If you compare how the United States, at least, has changed over time, obesity rates have been getting significantly worse across most of the continental United States, to the point that obesity is a major public health problem. And when we talk about exercise and talk about weight loss, we're not talking about, Biggest Loser stuff where people lose like 100 pounds, which is frankly a scam, because most of these people regain the weight after the show is over, which is a major pitfall of how they did weight loss on that show. There's a whole field of research on this, which is fascinating, actually. But the benefits of losing weight are not to be completely discounted, but they don't have to be much. Even a 10% weight loss, so going from 200 pounds to 180 pounds, which doesn't sound like you've lost a lot of weight, is substantial in terms of reducing your overall mortality, reducing your risk of diabetes, reducing your cholesterol, reducing your risk of cancer, dropping your blood pressure. Somebody who can lose 10% of their body weight, that is substantial in terms of the health benefits. And when we talk about medications to cause weight loss, they often result in about 10% loss of body weight, which people are like, that's not that much. I want to be the weight I was in high school. I'm like, well, look, that's probably not going to happen. But if you can lose 10 to 20 pounds from the medical point of view, that is fantastic. And, people have gotten off medications just by changing their lifestyle and losing even, what many would consider to be trivial amounts of weight. The point is this, is that exercise alone is not the answer to weight loss. And here's the thing, if you just exercise, you probably are not going to lose that much weight, because burning calories is a lot harder than people think it is. Most of the issues that we have regarding obesity are a consequence of the fact that we consume too many calories. So caloric restriction is the key. It's easier said than done, right? I'm not going to sit here and tell you that losing weight is easy and dieting is easy. In fact, most diets are garbage and hard to stick with. But even if there is no weight loss with exercise, exercise is very, very beneficial for health. And I've sort of added in a thing here about medications. I'll just take 5 seconds to talk to you about medications. The best prescription medications that exist for weight loss are actually the newer diabetes medications, like semaglutide, which is a GLP analog. Biochemistry is not important, but it's basically a once weekly injection. It's not insulin, because insulin makes you gain weight. That is true. This is a once weekly injection that treats diabetes, but it also has, as a consequence, improvement in insulin sensitivity, which leads to weight loss. I don't know what the rules are in Ontario, but actually, no, sorry, I do know what the rules are in Ontario, because I was speaking with my friend in Ottawa recently. If you're not diabetic, these medications won't be covered unless you have private insurance, and they can be very expensive. But these are prescription medications that you can give people, and they do work, and they can often be an important component of a medical regimen for somebody that has a very, very severe problem with obesity. I think the requirements are that your BMI be over 30. So this isn't for somebody who's trying to lose 5 pounds to fit into their jeans. It's for people who have a big problem with obesity that is causing them serious health problems like diabetes, high blood pressure, et cetera, et cetera. So be aware that these things exist. Medications are out there, and I think that they are underused, although part of it is, of course, funding and insurance coverage. But these medications are out there. But the point of the slide originally, before I went on this small digression, is that exercise is good for you even if you don't lose weight. How much exercise? Well, the answer is some. If you can go from 0 to something, that's where you see the greatest benefit. After a while, you do get, mouse has disappeared again. After a while, you do get into the issue of diminishing marginal returns, right? So doing more and more and more exercise isn't better and better and better. At a certain point, you sort of plateau out. And you've seen this in multiple different studies that, at a certain point, more isn't better unless you enjoy it. If you enjoy playing tennis for 2 hours, go nuts. Do what makes you happy. The point is, you get the greatest benefit when you go from something to nothing, when you go from 0 to 30 minutes per day of exercise. Which again, begs the question is like, well, can I injure myself? Like, should I, like you said, nothing to something. So can I just play like sports with my friends on the weekends? And the answer is sure. And people are like, well, I'm really worried about being a weekend warrior. Is that dangerous? The reality is they've actually studied this, and it's no. The highest risk group are the people who are inactive. People who are insufficiently active, meaning they do less than 150 minutes of exercise per week. The weekend warriors who do all the necessary physical activity, but condensed down into a weekend. Or people who are regularly active who do 30 minutes a week, 5 times a week, and do their 150 minutes. I mean, there's a bit of a gradient here, but all of them are better off. So the point is, the thing that's most dangerous is doing nothing. So even if you don't exercise daily, and you can just do something on the weekends, because that's when your team meets up to, play basketball, then you know what? Do that. Something is better than nothing. A quick note on how long to exercise. The thing that's become very fashionable recently is like the 5-minute workout, or then the 3-minute workout, and then the 2-minute workout. And then it's like, you just imagine that you're doing a workout. I love this quote. This is from Josh Fried from the Montreal Gazette, and I think it's just funny. There is a growing, it's sort of leveled off recently, but a few years back, it was very, very popular to talk about, we're going to do all our exercise in 5 minutes, 5 minutes of intense exercise, and that's what's going to be beneficial. And the reality is they have studied this. I won't belabor the point thing, but the point is this: does it improve? Is there a benefit to doing like these minute a day exercises? Yeah, in a sense that it improves your VO2 max, it improves your insulin sensitivity, improves your power output when they measure like muscle strength. Except that when you say this to people, they're like, well, what does VO2 max mean? What the heck is an insulin sensitivity index? Like, is it better than regular exercise? And the answer is no. No. The results of the study suggest that although HIIT protocols, meaning high intensity interval training protocols, they're time efficient, but they are not superior to conventional exercise training in sedentary young adults. So yeah, you're exercising for less time, but you're not really gaining anything by it. So these very, very fancy sort of like 8-minute exercise or 5-minute exercise programs, they're no better than just going out and doing regular stuff. The interesting thing is that most people found these HIIT protocols significantly less enjoyable. And so the results suggest that these HIIT protocols are time efficient. They are not superior. Like, people don't enjoy them. And if you don't enjoy the exercise, you're not going to do it. The best way to derive a benefit from exercise is to find something that you enjoy, that you're going to do consistently over the long term. So the reality is, just find something that you like doing. Find the sport, find the group. I'm not sure dancing classes in the time of COVID, although soon, I mean, things are getting a little bit better, but, find something that you enjoy and do that, because the best thing to do is to be active. Avoid long sedentary periods. Make walking part of your physical daily life, and find triggers like stairs that will make you do things that you wouldn't normally do. So don't take the elevator, take the stairs, walk to the store, like park further away and walk more. Find ways to put exercise into your daily life, and find an activity you like. And whether that's walking or biking or skiing, find it and do it unapologetically. So, there's simple things that you can do at the beginning, go to a different floor to use the bathroom at work, walk stairs rather than using the elevator. And remember that patients, even who have underlying medical problems, can still exercise and be very physically active. And that will only make things better. It's very, very unlikely that it's going to make things worse. So I will take your questions. I'm going to do a short plug for a podcast I do with a friend of mine, Jonathan. This is a very old picture, and I put it in for nostalgia reasons. This is actually, took this photo 10 years ago. I don't think I've changed that much. If I take my glasses off, you can tell me. Although I wore glasses back then, I was just very vain. But this is the thing. So this is the podcast we do. You can check it out. Our most recent episode was on Alzheimer's disease. So if you have a question about Alzheimer's, you can listen there and talk about it. But yeah, I will take your questions. And we have one from Elka, and I will unshare the screen.
Yeah, I have two questions, actually. Like, you've
Yeah.
given time for most groups, but you haven't given any time for people over 80.
Right.
So that's the first question.
I mean, you don't, here's the thing, there's no specific guidance for people over the age of 80. The point of these sort of age-based guidance is to make a distinction between children who primarily just need to, run and play and, don't overthink it, to young adults who basically can do whatever they want, and just some recognition that you have to have a balance to your exercise program. And the recognition that as we get older, strength training counterintuitively becomes more important. So we don't have specific recommendations. It's just the realization that, working on your balance, which is like, that's not exercise. Well, there's benefits and there's reasons to preventing injury. So as you get older, just be more mindful of these things and realize that pumping iron sounds like it would be stupid to do when you're 80, but actually regular exercise training with low impact weights is actually going to be beneficial for osteoporosis, for arthritis in terms of your flexibility, and about mobility. So like stretching and stuff like that. I mean, the reality is yoga. I mean, again, strip away the cultural and, spiritual thing where you're like, I mean, there's a lot about yoga that's not scientific, right? You're like, we're sweating away the toxins. That's not a thing. Let the spirit of the world imbue, like, no. But if you take it for what it is, which is essentially muscle training, it's actually really good because it really works the core. It helps with balance. And as we get older, those issues become important. So
The other question is, what about intermittent and intense exercise with regular, like high intensity, then slow?
Yeah, so those were the last slides, the HIIT stuff that I was talking about, the high intensity interval training. It's not really any better. Now, if you're trying to win the Olympics, there is a rationale for this type of interval training because you're trying to boost your exercise capacity. But if you're trying to be healthier, it doesn't really matter what you do. So if you like high interval training, again, go nuts. But it's not usually enjoyable. The best exercise is the one you stick with. So for everybody listening here, it doesn't really matter what. Now, if you like running intervals because you have a group and you do that, go ahead. I've tried running intervals on a treadmill. I find that unpleasant because you have to keep changing the speed of the treadmill. And I'm like, you know what? I don't need this. It's easier to do outside because you run from point A to point B, really, really fast. And then you can jog back. So it's easier to do there. But on a treadmill, I find it's complicated unless you have one of those pre-programmed things where the treadmill does it for you. And again, sure. And if you want to do it. But you know what? If you don't like running on a treadmill and you prefer to play tennis, do that. The point is, do the thing that you enjoy.
Thank you.
Richard, you have a question, and I'll be mindful of the chat too. Yeah.
Sorry, Chris, why don't you go to Motown first? He has his hand up first.
Okay. Motown. Oh, you're on mute.
Can you describe the nature of your podcast?
Oh, it's okay. Best way to explain it. It's a comedy / medical podcast. It's really hard to explain, but whatever you think it is. So here's the thing. I was doing cross-country checkup a little while ago. I forget when. And so I was chatting with the host beforehand. And we were talking. He's like, "Oh, listen, I checked out. I saw you were going to be on. You know, he looks up the guest. Like, I listened to the first 30 minutes of your podcast." He's like, and I think his response was, "I don't know what I was expecting." And then I heard this, and I thought to myself, why would these guys put so much effort into this podcast? It's nonsensical, because most podcasts are really like, two people talking or there's an interview. Ours is almost more like an old 1950s radio show. Like there's a script, there's music, it's like stuff is happening. It's a little bit zany. If you listen to the last episode first, there's going to be a dog driving a car, which won't make sense, but it's part of a through line of like a narrative arc that's been going on. So we try to make things funny. And so it's a lot of it is the conversation between me and Jonathan. And we're basically playing versions of ourselves where we have like these like running gags that are, so I would say listen to one. If you enjoy it, then listen to the back catalog and you'll get a sense for how things have evolved and why they have evolved. But basically, we take one major topic every month. Last month was Alzheimer's disease. We dissect that topic, go over what the evidence is for this. And then we also do like some more current news stuff. So like this month we talked about Alzheimer's disease, and then we had 2 smaller discussions on long COVID, for which there is surprisingly little data about anything. And then we also debated one of the issues that came up here in Quebec, which was, the vaccine tax, which is not happening anymore. But we sort of had a more sort of philosophical discussion about how other forms of excise tax, like tobacco tax and alcohol taxes and gas taxes, have been implemented over the years, and what are the differences between there. So that's the basic framework of the podcast.
Okay, thank you. Could you put the title of it in the chat? Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. Sure.
Thank you.
It's called The Body of Evidence. If you Google it and find the movie by Madonna, you've gone to the wrong place. Because that is a Madonna movie and not a good one. So if you end up watching that, it's going to be an issue. One of these days, she's going to sue us. I just don't know where it is. There you go. There you go. You found it. Glenn found it. Yeah, it's easy to find. Just put it into like whatever podcast app you have. It's the only well, I shouldn't say it's the only podcast. It's a pretty common name. So if we ever get sued, it's going to be an issue. But so far, we're good.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'll go next. You've called me before, but it sounds like with your podcast, you're indulging a whole other different side of you at the same time as satisfying your medical needs. So it sounds wonderful to me, and that you just sold me on it. So thank you. Two of the points you made in your speech, one I want to just highlight, and the other one I want to clarify. You said something about weak muscles use more oxygen and are less efficient.
Yeah.
That is fascinating to me. Can you just comment on that a little bit?
Yeah. So especially when you're talking about respiratory muscles, don't forget you need muscles to, whoops, let me turn off the notifications on my computer so it stops beeping. To take a deep breath in, your muscles need to contract. Like it's an active process. You don't think about it, right? You don't actively, well, you can purposefully breathe, but you don't think it, but it is a muscular contraction, like your diaphragm has to contract. There has to be a point to you, right? And there are muscles in between your ribcage called the intercostals, which also play a role. So there is a certain physical amount of energy that's necessary to expand the rib cage. And what happens is with people who have chronic lung diseases is that they start to become decompensated. They start to lose muscle strength, and their muscles become weaker. It becomes harder for them to do that. And the oxygen demands of the muscle become higher and less efficient as well. So if you were just to sort of make a bit of an analogy, if you're somebody who does an exercise and you have to go out and run a 5K, let's say, you're going to need a lot of oxygen. You're going to start hyperventilating quickly. Your muscles are going to start making lactic acid easily because you're not very efficient. Whereas somebody who's like an elite athlete, they can exercise at what we call aerobic metabolism for a much longer period of time. The reason your muscles get sore when you exercise is because your muscles switch from aerobic metabolism to anaerobic metabolism. So for anybody who does science, here you're using the Krebs cycle and you're making energy this way. Whereas when you get into anaerobic metabolism, you no longer need oxygen per se. You're burning glucose to make energy, but you're producing lactic acid. And it's that lactic acid that builds up and makes your muscles sore. So the longer that you can operate at the aerobic level using oxygen, the longer you're going to be able to exercise and the more efficient you're going to be. The minute you lose that ability. And this is where exercise becomes important, because we raise our aerobic threshold. You can exercise for longer without converting to lactic acid, without fatiguing your muscles. And so this is what happens as we become deconditioned. Exercise becomes harder. Whereas the minute you start exercising, all of a sudden, you start off, you're like, you do 15 minutes and you're tired, but then you do that for 6 months. You're like, oh, I used to be able to walk 15 minutes. Now I can walk 30. And then after a while, it's like, oh, now I can do like a full hour walk. So you become better the more you do. It just often happens so gradually that you don't actually realize it.
Wow. Okay. Now that's a real eye opener to me. So thank you. The clarification came during the kind of the gallop at the beginning there, talking about the impacts on all of the possible conditions and systems of the body. And you said something about inflammatory diseases,
Right.
that there's some sort of effect on inflammatory conditions. Can
Yeah.
you mention that a little bit?
Sure. So this is an interesting story. The way in which people first started to realize that aspirin was good for your heart was because people who had inflammatory arthritis, so things like rheumatoid arthritis, which is a pro-inflammatory state, they tended to have more heart disease, except that when you treated them with high dose aspirin, their risk of heart attack would go down. And the reason for that is that when you have a pro-inflammatory state in your body, your risk of heart disease go up. So people will often overstate. I mean, here's the thing. People use the word inflammation as sort of a grab bag term for like whatever, like this is bad for you. How does it work? I don't know. Inflammation, it is a word that people throw around a lot. But it is true that if you have things like rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, let me think of another example here. A lot of autoimmune conditions where you have a chronic pro-inflammatory state that is not good for your vascular health. So people who have rheumatoid arthritis are at higher risk for heart disease. And so you have to be mindful of the fact that that is a risk factor too. And so when you exercise, it's good not just for maintaining the health of your joints, but also in protecting your heart, because there are these ancillary risks that go along with it.
Right. And just one last question.
Yeah.
Is psoriasis a chronic pro-inflammatory state?
Yeah, now it depends how bad it is. If you have a very, very mild case, I wouldn't excessively worry about it. But yes, it is, right? So, you have to be, if you can treat it and get it under control, then it's good. And the good thing is with a lot of these things, like the Crohn's ulcerative colitis, is like a lot of the disease-modifying agents that exist. They suppress the inflammation, and a lot of people can live without symptoms. So, I mean, the goal of therapies now is that even if you have something like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, you should be symptom-free. Like you can, I mean, it's obviously easier said than done. You need the medication, but you can, you can suppress the inflammation and live without symptoms and live a fairly normal life.
Thank you.
Elka has her hand up.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. We're talking about diets. You were saying how diets were very good. I do want to mention what the current Weight Watchers program is. It really, really is extraordinarily good. I got fed up with what I was doing to my body over COVID, and I started off fine, and then what I was eating is just a ton of crap endlessly, like and I have diabetes, so I was really getting upset with that, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go back to Weight Watchers, because then I have to record, and that helps me discipline myself, and I'll start eating healthier. I didn't have to lose weight. That's not, it was discipline that I needed.
Yeah.
So what I found in the new program they have, which is outstanding, because now it's all digital. Well, before when people were coming in person, you couldn't get a personalized program. But now because it's digital, it can. So like one of my concerns about the program in the past is that in the past, I would get 0 points for vegetables and also 0 points for fruit. I'm diabetic.
Yeah.
So what they have now, they ask you for a few questions, you do the questions, and then your program is directly designed for you. So for me, I can eat chicken for 0 points, and fish for 0 points, and eggs for 0 points, and a certain amount of avocado for 0 points, lots and lots and lots of vegetables for 0 points. But if I'm eating fruit or carbs, huge point count if I want spaghetti.
Yeah.
So this is how it's controlled. So it's a much more, I think, effective program now.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, Weight Watchers, or WW as they've styled themselves now. I mean, it's not perfect. It does perform a little bit better than some of the other, fad diets, because it's not a diet. It's a nutrition program. It's not the be all and end all. It works for some people, it works for others. It's not perfect. And there have been criticisms of some of their point schemes, as you pointed out, like with the fruit. They're like, well, if you're diabetic, though, eating a lot of strawberries is not good for you. That's going to raise your blood sugar. So there are times when it has sometimes lacked a little subtlety. But again, if it works for you,
but
and
now
it
you
gets
don't
you
get that. But now you don't get you can't eat that
Yeah.
amount of fruit, because it just takes out such a big wall of your allocated points.
Yeah.
That you just can't do it.
Yeah. And so that's the thing. So, I mean, if it works for you, then sure. So, I mean, and that's the thing with weight loss and with diets, like you find the one that works for you, as long as the diet gets you to eat less and you can do it in a sustainable way, that's where you get the benefit. All right. I think James had his hand up first, and then we'll do Glenn, and then we'll do Hiba.
Yes, thanks, Doctor. I wonder if you've come across any new information or tips on reducing fat or weight around the belly or internal organs like liver area.
The best way to do that is to not gain the weight in the first place, which of course is easier said than done. But that's why I think it's so important that we focus on especially these healthy lifestyle stuff in our kids. The issue of childhood obesity is becoming a real problem. Here's the thing. I don't want to say that it's inevitable that you gain weight as we get older, but it's not uncommon. Most people gain about 0.5 pound a year. As we get older, it happens. What we have to do is to try to minimize it. And the best way to minimize it is to start trying to curtail the process as early as possible. So when you're on the youngish side, when you're in your 50s and 60s and you start realizing that you're getting a bit of a belly, that's when you have to try to start changing it, because the worse it gets, the harder it's going to be to return. Remember that if it took you 40 years to gain those 40 pounds, you're not going to lose it in 6 months, right? If it took you 40 years to gain the weight, it's not going to be lost. It's going to take you 40 years to lose it. Weight loss is slow and a gradual process. So the sooner you start it, the better off you're going to be. And the way to do that is really, watch what you eat, cut out unnecessary calories from your diet. So very sugary stuff. Sugary drinks are a major source of calories that people don't realize. So alcohol has a lot of calories in it. Flavored coffee has a lot of calories in it. So when you go to the Tim Hortons or wherever and you order a coffee, if you're ordering anything other than a black coffee, there are a lot of calories in it. So be mindful of that. Fruit juices, especially the stuff that we give to kids, a lot of calories in that. So really identify the stuff that's problematic, cut it out, and really try to get at the problem as early as possible, because again, it's something that happens so gradually with time that when you suddenly realize, like, oh my God, I'm 20 pounds heavier than I was a while ago, that's very hard to fix at that point, because weight loss does not it happens over years. It doesn't happen over months. Glenn.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, Chris. Thanks. Been very informative. Stuff I've been dealing with on and off most of my life.
Yeah.
From a large part of my life, I was very active.
Yeah.
I was an avid tennis player. I played a lot, particularly once I started slowing down in work and retiring, or going into retirement. Tennis became my passion.
Mm.
However, arthritis came and knocked me off my perch of that. I can't hold a racket anymore. And it just became very depressing.
Yeah.
That said, and then age sort of set in, and then the COVID.
Yeah.
And so my sedentary lifestyle has been quite busy being sedentary. And I'm struggling with it.
Yeah.
I have two questions specifically. One is, I'll say that the I forget the term you use for medication. My wife and I are both on Ozempic right now.
Yeah, that's semaglutide. That's Ozempic.
Yeah, and I would say it's beneficial.
Yeah.
At our age and we're both pre-diabetic, diabetic. We do get it covered, and so that's great because otherwise it'd be like $200 a month.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
No, it's not cheap. So it's great, and Ontario covers it.
Yeah.
The other thing is supplements, and
Yeah.
over the years I have tried. You run into people, and some people say they're experts. They've done research, and one name that comes to mind is or one supplement is bromelain, which is something to do with fruit from Mexico.
Yeah.
Pineapple.
Yeah.
Comes from pineapple. Anyway, my sister, who I would consider a bit of a health nut, and then she does heavy research. She's put me onto this product.
Okay.
And it happens to have it has a number of things in here.
Yeah.
Anyway, and it's a commercial product. You buy it online.
Yeah.
And it just happens to have a mix of various things like protease and boswellia and ginger root extract and yucca root. So it's trace amounts. It's not. It hasn't been a quick fix, but for me, I believe maybe it's part of the mental. But since I've been taking this for the last 6 months, I've lost 30 pounds.
Yeah.
And some of it has to do with my appetite increasing. I suffer from urges.
Yeah.
And I just think supplements, maybe in my case, have been helpful. Do you have
do you think it was that, or do you think it was the Ozempic that you're on?
Well, I did the Ozempic first.
Yeah.
And then I added the daily supplements.
Yeah, I think it was the Ozempic though, because that's exactly what Ozempic does. Here's the problem. A weight loss medication can only make you lose weight if it does one of three things, right? It either has to make you eat less by curbing your appetite.
Yeah.
It either has to make your energy production less efficient, which meaning that you're burning energy as heat rather than storing it as fat. So you're consuming food and you're losing it to heat because your body has become less efficient. So you basically become a hibernating bear, or done the reverse of what a hibernating bear does. Or three, it has to make you not absorb the food in the first place. So there is a medication that does the third thing. It's called orlistat. It blocks the absorption of fat from your intestine. It's fairly effective as a weight loss medication, except that its main side effects is that it makes you produce a copious amount of greasy, foul-smelling stool. Because basically the food is passing right through you. Orlistat exists as a medication for people who also have issues with constipation. It can be effective. It's generally not given first line anymore, even though it is a pill and the semaglutide is an injection, but it is an option that's out there. The thing about uncoupling energy expenditure to heat was tried with a bunch of diet medications from the 1970s. They were all discontinued because the main problem was that it was causing heat stroke in patients. Because you can imagine if all of a sudden you're raising your core body temperature, people were going into heat stroke. So those medications don't exist anymore. And the other way is to curb your appetite, which is mainly what semaglutide is doing. It's blocking the hormonal response of satiety, so you don't eat as much. So you can either take that or take the other medication that curbs your appetite, which are, methamphetamines, which are great, provided you're willing to lose your teeth and develop a drug problem. So there are a number of pharmacological agents that can work. The semaglutide does work. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. That supplement that you said is I think it's frankly doing nothing for you. The weight loss that you saw, that would be typical for semaglutide. You've just described the way all the clinical trials were done. So you have the Ozempic, which has been studied, which has 10, 20, 30 pounds of weight loss, depending on, how successful you are. And then you have this product you're buying off the internet, which has no studies behind it. I suspect that bottle supplement thing is doing absolutely nothing.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. And just to sort of touch base on your opening comment there about the arthritis, that is the major problem people with arthritis have. They get arthritis, they have pain, it limits their activity, it makes them gain weight. The weight gain makes the strain on their joints worse, so the arthritis becomes worse, so they do less and they gain more weight. So there's this vicious cycle to arthritis. That's why it's so important to treat it early if you can. Not everything is treatable, but a lot of times patients are like, I need to get a knee replacement or a hip replacement because the pain is so bad. I just can't do anything and I'm gaining weight and it's causing me all these medical issues. So treating arthritis early as best as possible makes a huge difference in terms of maintaining physical activity and maintaining a healthy body weight and blood pressure, diabetes, and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, but specific to that,
Yeah.
Arthritis is, there's no like thing that treats it particularly.
Depends which type of arthritis. That's the thing. Arthritis is not one disease. There's like 5 different types of arthritis. So you need the right medication for the right type of arthritis. So if you had rheumatoid arthritis, for example, you start, well, I mean, if it's very, very mild, then you can maybe just get away with oral anti-inflammatories. If that's not good enough, you go to methotrexate. If that's not good enough, then you want to go to one of the injectable medications like Remicade, let's say, for example. So there's a stepwise approach. So don't live with the pain. Go and get the right treatment. If it's osteoarthritis, that becomes harder to treat, but regular analgesics could potentially be helpful. And if it's a large joint, if it's knee or hip, a surgical replacement, which I know is surgery, right? But a surgical replacement could help. And if it's significantly impacting your quality of life, that is something to consider. Yeah, when it's hands are tough. The other thing to do is to look at the joint injections. They're not long lasting, but they can provide temporary relief.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Iba.
Hi. 2018, I had cancer. And after the cancer, I ended with a fatty liver.
Yeah.
And I ended with a very low memory, like the people who had Alzheimer. And during the last summer, it was the first time for me to keep walking much time. I walk a lot. I eliminate carbohydrate in my food, like no carbohydrate at all, no sugar, no something with sugary. But there is kind of like, there is some type of treating the cancer after, if you don't want it to come back, but you have to eat a fatty food, which is I can't because I have a fatty liver. So
I've never heard that before. Sorry, I've never heard that before. You have to eat a fatty food to prevent the cancer from recurring?
Yeah, like no, not too much red meat, only lower your protein, like a little bit of chicken for the whole week.
Okay. Yeah. So here's the thing. Here's the thing. Imagine your plate as like a sort of a circle. So when somebody tells you eat less red meat, that doesn't mean eat more fat or eat more sugar. It just means eat less of something else. So yes, it's right. Like eating red meat compared to eating, white meat or fish does increase your risk specifically of colon cancer a little bit. So definitely if we could eat less red meat and get more of our food from fruits and vegetables, we would be better off. So that is true. That being said, though, I mean, so here's the thing. There's a difference between saying I'm going to eat less red meat and purposefully going out and eating more fatty food, right? In the same way that when people get into these like pointless debates about low carb, low fat, they're like, eating less sugar doesn't mean going out and eating more ice cream, So like you can cut carbs out of your diet without purposefully going out and putting butter in your coffee, which people have done. So yeah. So here's the thing. The point is to eat less of the thing that it's bad for you, not to go out and compensate it by eating more of something else. This was a big problem in the 80s, 90s, where everybody was like, we got to cut fat out of our diet. And then they're like, we're going to make cookies with a lot of sugar in them. That's going to be great. They're like, hold on, a cookie is a cookie. Just because you put less butter and put more sugar didn't make it healthier. In the same way that putting less sugar and putting more butter doesn't make it healthier. It's still a cookie. It's still junk food. Eat celery. That's the way forward. So be mindful of these things. So yes, eating a lot of red meat is not good for you. Substitute that out with fish, but you don't have to purposely go and eat a lot of fatty food. A fatty liver, for people who don't know, you get an ultrasound for some reason, they see fat in your liver, they call it a fatty liver. Everybody freaks out and loses their mind, like, oh my God, my liver is failing. No, it just means you got a lot of fat in your liver because you got a lot of fat inside of you. The point is to change your lifestyle And this does regress with time. So it's not it's not the worrisome thing that people seem to think it is. And I think a lot of times physicians forget to tell patients like, yeah, you need to exercise more and eat better, which frankly, they could have told you before you had the ultrasound and saw that there's a lot of fat around your liver, because exercise is always good for you. You don't need a specific reason to go out and do it.
I actually did the exercise for
Yeah.
so long, and then they still have but the function for the liver is so good.
That's
But
fatty
still have
liver.
the fat around.
Yeah. Fatty liver doesn't mean your liver is not functioning. Fatty liver just means you have a lot of fat stored in your liver, because that's where your body stores fat in your internal organs. So it's just a question of increased visceral adiposity. It's not I say it's not a medical diagnosis. I guess it is, but it's not like, it has nothing to do with your liver function, right? Your liver is fine. You just,
I do,
yeah,
I
it's just,
understand.
I mean, again, it's easy to say like eat right and exercise. Yeah, I get it. It's complicated, but it's just a question of adopting the healthy lifestyle factors that we need.
But because I reduced the carbohydrate, I lost around 15 kilos.
Yeah.
Since 2019 until now.
Yeah, there we go. Like, here's the thing. People
I
say
eat a
weight
lot
loss.
of fruits, lots of vegetables. I'm staying away of even too much sugar in the fruits.
That's it. Yeah, that's the thing. So we talk about fruits and vegetables, that fruits are healthier, and they are, but some fruits are very, very high in sugar. So like watermelon, strawberries, anything that tastes very, very sweet is high in sugar. So you gotta be a little bit careful about that, right? So we talk about, again, better that than a hamburger, but be mindful of the fact that very sweet fruit has a lot of sugar in it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Janet.
Hi there. Can
Hi.
you hear me? Good. Thanks. I've enjoyed listening to you. I love your fast talker, and I love your examples, because they're like so relatable. Like I get it. Yeah. So I'm feeling, after you talked about watermelon, and I'm feeling guilty because my 97-year-old mom is very fit in a retirement home. And she's living on cookies, and I'm enabling them. I bring her cookies. She goes through a pack of cookies a week, and then I'm eating cookies when I'm with her, and then I'm seeing results. But anyway, still is able to. So there's so many things I want to talk about, but I'm just going to say, I'm loving the Olympics right now, and we see the examples of these fit kids, especially the girls, brave as heck. On snowboarding, the skiing, the downhill, the jump is like a powerhouse. And then I was a PE teacher for years, and so I'm so into physical activity. And then I see the decline. And then for years there was a decrease of physical activity in schools. It was not a mandated, it was an optional program to take. And then I saw the increase of like aerobics. The gyms came out. That gym culture and aerobic classes. So got girls back into fitness. Yeah, very active. And then that's kind of died down now a lot too. And I'm just seeing. And then of course now we're talking as people are seniors and they're older, how to get them active. So there's been sometimes like this massive gap between, physical activity in high school setting to when they're seniors. So yes, they walk, and there's a lot of hiking groups now, which is good. But I still think back to my days, like nostalgia, the days of, say, the participation, activity, kind of government-sponsored programs that were like, stop smoking or whatever, but it's that get back to exercise, the fitness. Do you see a role for any of those kind of social programs, the government-sponsored programs that can?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, yes, because here's the thing. It's important to have PE in school. Now, as somebody who was never very good at sports, I will say that when I was graded on how many baskets I could shoot in a minute, I was like, I don't see how that's useful. I do feel that that there should be physical education throughout school, frankly, like into high school. For a thing is like just for the exercise. I mean, there is a public health benefit to getting kids to exercise, and you have the perfect time to do it. They're in school. Just, you have gyms, and it doesn't have to be competition. It could just be sports. It could just be, it could be anything. It could be team sports that build like relationships and cooperation. It doesn't have to be competitive to be physically active. I think the point I was trying to make. So definitely throughout high school, that should be a thing. What do you do when you're an adult though? And it would be great if there were community-based things. And again, it depends where you live, but that's also one of the slides I was talking about, is like having stuff in the community. When you have parks, when you have bicycle lanes, when you have things that make it easier for people to be active, that helps. If there's community places where people can go and join teams, join a soccer team, join a golf club, join a place where you can do stuff, join a hiking group. So something there that is sponsored by the community. Basically YMCAs are still around, although I don't see them as much as I used to, but somewhere where the community can focus. The other thing too, and we shouldn't forget it, is exercise programs within the workplace. Just like you get a break to do exercise in school, you should get a break to do exercise at work. I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, a lot of people do this themselves. They organize walking clubs at lunch. So during your lunch hour, you go out and take a walk with people. I think that makes sense, but it would be great if that was incorporated into the workday, in the same way that you would have a coffee break. You should have an exercise break. I think that would be good for society as a whole. It would make you healthier. And frankly, it's not taking that much out of your day, even if it's just like 45 minutes or even 30 minutes, it's like, that's really all you need. It would make a huge impact in a lot of people's lives, because most people, the minute they finish work and have to get home, they don't have time to exercise because they have to get home, make dinner. Maybe they have kids, there's a commute, like it eats up a lot of your day. 30 minutes out of the workday to have like mandatory, to have an exercise program, I think would make a huge difference.
Yeah, because I from what I'm seeing too, when I talk about this gap, when I'm at the retirement home and I see ladies around a table, maybe a couple men, and they're talking, they're engaged, they're lively, they seem very fit when they talk, and then I watch them and they get up and they all reach for their walker.
Yeah.
Then they hunch over. Yeah. The walkers tend to be lower, and then they're all like this convoy of walkers, and they don't seem that unfit.
Yeah.
Somehow it's almost as if maybe their children say, okay, you're a bit unsteady. Okay, here's your walker. And once they get that walker, my gosh, they see themselves in another way. They struggle with it. Their posture declines, etc. So I know my mom's a wee bit unsteady, but she said at 97, she still walks a major corridor and she's a little bit more flexible than I am. And my sister said, I think she's ready for a walker. And I said, no. Until she's ready to fall, no, she's not having a walker, because that's that. But I just see such a readiness to maybe it's to protect them from falls. Yes. But I just see a readiness to, instead of strengthening, getting them to have more balance programs, that it's ready to, here.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, nothing stops you from doing both simultaneously, right? So I know when people come to the hospital, they usually get assessed by physiotherapy or occupational therapy before they leave, and you're worried because you don't want somebody to fall. Because the reality is, somebody falls and breaks a hip, that is a devastating injury.
I get it.
And that is a major operation and weeks, if not months of rehab afterwards. So it's not trivial. Now, again, your point is well taken. Like if you could get them as part of an exercise program to prevent the falls in the first place, so much the better. But again, nothing stops you from doing both at the same time. And oftentimes it doesn't have to be a walker. Just a cane sometimes is useful, especially if it's one of those 4-pointed canes, right? Or like the cane that has 4, just that little extra bit of stability. Now, there's a whole other issue to this, which is home assessments. It's like identifying things that make it dangerous for people to fall, bathtubs, rugs, things that people can trip on. So if you can do a formalized home assessment by people who do these things professionally, you can identify the stuff that put you at particularly high risk for falls and remove them and reduce the risk of falls in that way. And so that makes a difference too. But yeah, again, and the advantage of being part of a senior's home of some kind is that if they can incorporate regular physical activity into the home, that prevents the residents from falling, which is good for them, and frankly also a good business model for the residents too.
Yes, just one comment. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And they do have an exercise program every an hour or half an hour every day at 10 in the morning.
Yeah.
They're all chair based. So they all park they park their strollers and they sit in a chair. And
Yeah.
so yes, they stretch. Yes, they stretch, their arms stretch their leg, but there's nothing but balance. But you know, anyway, I'm just saying it, at least they are doing something. And
Yeah,
so okay, thank you. Thanks for that.
my pleasure. Richard.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Chris. I said I wouldn't do that. Sorry, Chris. Now, I just a comment to Janet that I think that there should be a law that 95 years old, you get to eat what you like. And so,
Yeah, fair point. Yeah.
yeah, cookies, she's done everything right. And now
Yeah.
it's just the gravy. If she wants gravy on her cookies, she can have that too.
There you go.
Speaking of gravy, there's one slide you had there that showed, Christopher, that had a hamburger. And
Yeah.
I thought if every hamburger looked as unappetizing as the picture that you showed, I would never eat a hamburger again.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the secret. We got to get McDonald's making less appetizing looking food, and everybody else too. But the one thing I wanted to say, and maybe which would be a good contribution to the presentation you've made today, which was amazing. I really enjoyed it. And there's so much. I took 4 pages of notes. Is the pairing of exercise. Like Patton Oswalt, a comedian, said, there's no exercise equipment that is as enticing as my big screen TV.
Yeah.
And so I took that to heart and paired the two. And so now there's programs that I only watch when I'm exercising in front of them.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there. I'm not doing a Peloton watching someone walking up a mountain. I'm watching The Sopranos because I particularly enjoy them. And when I finish The Sopranos, I'll go on to something else I really enjoy. And I only watch it when I'm exercising. If I'm not exercising, I can't watch it.
Yeah.
And so by pairing those two things together, I found that I'm on an exercise program for the last 2 years that I've never been as consistent as that in the past. And so that just pairing things you like with something that is maybe less enjoyable, like exercise, has been, really effective for me.
I know you're completely right. And that thing of tying an incentive to the exercise program has been studied and has been shown to be effective in many circumstances. So it's exactly right. Find a show that you like, a binge-worthy show. I mean, the classic example that people use in a bunch of research program was Game of Thrones. Like they would bring people in, download a full season of Game of Thrones onto a tablet and say, you can come, but you can only watch it when you're here exercising. And people would come because the show was, really compelling to watch. Right up until the final season. I had some issues with the final season, but it's exactly that. So find something you enjoy. And that's where the group sports can also be very effective because it's not TV based. But if you're like, well, I have my group of friends, but I only see them when we're, get together to play baseball. Well, that you're going to show up and play baseball because one, you probably enjoy playing baseball, but you also enjoy seeing your friends. So it ties the reward of that social connection to the physical activity.
By the way, I watched Game of Thrones before I started watching Sopranos. So there you go. We're coming down to the end of the presentation for this evening. Chris has been very generous with his time, certainly. We've got time for maybe one more comment after Elka. So if you've got your first timer want to ask a question, then please get your hand up now. So we'll go to Elka and then Jerry.
Okay, just very, very quick. I just want to pick a bone with Richard about feeding someone who's 90 any kind of crap, because I disagree, and here's why. I'm 80. I'm actually closer to 81 than to 80. And I was aiming for 90, and that's how everything was set up. But now that I'm 80 and I'm okay for 80, I've decided to hell with 90. I'm heading for 100. So don't feed me crap because I want to make it to 100.
Fair enough.
I would just say a little bit of what you fancy does you good.
Yeah.
That's what my grandmother used to tell me. So maybe not all cookies, but a couple. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, thanks. This is a fascinating talk we're having here. And I just have a quick comment. I'm an avid runner, run countless marathons and all that sort of thing. And it's tied in with a group of friends. So it's a community thing as well. And we always talk about, we had a really good run. We have like a runner's high.
Yeah.
We have convinced ourselves. And similarly, if we don't exercise for a day, we all think we're grumpy and something's not right because we're not exercising. Is this a real thing, or is it just my imagination?
No, I mean, it's a real thing. I mean, people call it the runner's high. That might be overstating it a bit. It's not like, it's not like cocaine. But it is enjoyable, and especially if you're doing something you like, it is enjoyable. Like I run too. I feel better after I run. I feel more energized after I run. And if I don't do it, I do feel more lethargic. So there is definitely a bit of an endorphin rush when you do something like that. So, I mean, there's absolutely something to it. You can't become addicted to exercise in the same way. So, I mean, there is the possibility of taking the analogy a bit too far, but there is definitely a pleasurable sense that goes with the right type of exercise in a particularly dynamic form of exercise like running or playing sports or something like that.
I try to when I speak to people who are not physically active, I try to persuade them that there is this benefit, that they will feel better after the initial struggle at the beginning.
Yeah.
Then they will feel that similar way, and that they should aim for that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've succeeded in convincing anybody though.
Yeah, it's hard. It takes time to convince people. And some people, some people just don't like to run. Some people prefer to do this. So you have to find the sport that suits your personality. I like running because I can do it on my own schedule, my own time. I don't have to depend on other people's. Whereas with team-based sports, you're sort of dependent on everybody. And I have such a chaotic schedule to begin with that it just doesn't work for me. But some people like that social aspect. They like knowing that they have to be somewhere at 8 p.m. on Wednesday, so it's like, it's that sort of thing that makes the difference. So you find the thing that you like. And that's the thing. If it's enjoyable, you will keep doing it. And that's the point. Something that's enjoyable to you that fits your lifestyle is something that you're more likely to stick with.
And Chris, what about Jerry's question about the runner's low or the lack of running low? Is there anything to suggest that you're going to actually experience a kind of a downturn if you discontinue a program or first to stop it?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, certainly if something is part of your routine and you don't do it, you could get into not quite a depression. I don't want to overstate it, but yeah, you could get a bit of a low there. That is definitely a thing. You also can decompensate very quickly. So you might find that whereas you were normally exercising all the time, and then you lay off for like a week because of something, you'd be like, oh, I don't have the same energy I used to. I feel more fatigued. I feel more lethargic, and it takes a while to get back up to that level. So you can drop off very quickly. People don't realize it. Like if you get, like, let's say a bad bronchitis, you're like, okay, well, let's take it easy for a week until this recovers. And you're like, oof, I'm not the same I was. This has happened to a lot of people. They're like, I don't understand. I got COVID and I don't feel the same. I'm like, yeah, you had a very severe infection. Like, what did you think was going to happen? They're like, but this guy on the internet said COVID was mild. I'm like, all right, well, I guess you should have gotten vaccinated. So it happens. I mean, a lack of exercise can really drop your aerobic capacity, and you can feel that. I mean, not just like emotionally, but you can actually feel that physically a lot.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's fantastic, Chris. We really appreciate you being here today. Certainly, I think it's probably provided us a lot of food for thought and motivation to maybe to fix that, and to that there's no substitute for what we gain from exercise. It is good, and there's nothing else that takes that place. There's no pill, there's no drug. It's the thing that you need to do. So to have a quality of life and a longer life. And I love that quote. My favorite one there was this, to say that find time to exercise now or find time for illness later. Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
So again, I think that Chris deserves a proper round of applause. So please come off mute and give him your comments and give him your applause.
Thank you.
Great, thanks to everybody here. Thank you for being here this evening. Certainly, it's lovely to see a lot of familiar faces, but also some people that we don't normally see at the meetings. But we have regular speaker meetings at the Halton Peel Humanist Community. Great speakers like Chris, and also great community events that we have. Our documentary nights, certainly, and our discussion nights. We'll be having more of those as the year goes on. So please keep in touch with us on Meetup and Facebook. And of course, if you want to take the time to put in your contact details, if we don't have those already, put those into the chat now, and I'll make sure that you get on our speakers list. But until our next time, I thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you again next time.